Okay, this is the Arborist call for the 13th of June. We're going to start off with the core team updates and then research and implementation updates. We don't have any uh, other agenda items, so we'll just do open announcements and then open discussion. What are Arborist calls? These are calls where the engineers in the Zcash ecosystem come together to talk about network upgrades and coordinating work on protocol and implementation of new features. The idea of these calls is to provide a venue for us all to coordinate and share the work progress that we're making, and also to make the work that we're doing more visible to the Zcash community at large. Anybody can join these calls. Anybody who wants to participate and can sign up by going to zcasharborist.org. And if you want to suggest a topic for discussion or present something, just drop us an email on arboristcall@zfnd.org and we can schedule you in. Other ways to get involved: you can get a Zcash community grant, or at least you can apply for a Zcash community grant. You can join the Zcash R&D Discord, which is where most of the Zcash engineers hang out and chat. There is the ever spicy and exciting Zcash community forum, and you can find all these links again by pointing your browser at zcasharborist.org. We'll start off with the core team updates, and I'm going to guess that it's Chris today.
Looks like nobody else has shown up, so I guess I'm in the hot seat. Okay, so the ECC team, a number of us or a couple of us have been on PTO last week, so a bit of a truncated summary. So we've been working primarily on ZIP 320 support in the wallet backend.
I can talk about that if you want, but you carry on with the rest of the update.
Yep. So ZIP 320 support in the wallet backend, also finishing up a fix for a note commitment tree error, note commitment tree bug in the wallet backend that has interrupted a couple of users' wallets usability. And then the final sort of interesting thing is in the pursuit of adding privacy to being able to retrieve exchange rate information, Strad has gotten a prototype working at least of retrieving retrieving currency conversion rates over Tor from the wallet backend. So yeah, Dara, Emma, you wanted to talk about it?
And that will help in future with things like transmitting notes over text over Tor, which should really help scalability.
Yeah, this will allow us to do also essentially other parts of the wallet operations that are currently leaking more information than they should, such as transaction submission, can be done connecting to the Light Wallet D servers over Tor. So it's a pretty exciting improvement.
And partly thanks to the ZF sort of dev fund funding of
yeah, I think it was ZOMG back in the day.
ZOMG, sorry,
major grants for funding the RT work, because I would the integrating. I was trepidation. There was a bit of trepidation in terms of using it, given my past experiences trying to bundle Tor, but bundling RT as a library was significantly easier than all of my past attempts at getting Tor clients working on the fly. So yeah, kudos to the Tor team, Nick Mathewson and the others who've been working on it for crafting a rather nice library within their constraints.
Wrote a paper with Nick Mathewson and the other Tor people once. It was on Mixnet's reliability using reputation systems.
Yep.
Okay.
And the nice thing about also about this is that if using this and then using micnets instead, depending on like what properties we want to have. It starts the pathway towards being able to use whatever is most appropriate for whatever particular thing we are trying to do, whatever particular wallet sensitive thing. But having something to interact that way is far better than the status quo.
Yep. So I have been working on ZIP 320 support. It is basically finished, but so we ran into a slight niggle, which is that so the current database schema used in Zcash client SQLite, it assumes that any sort of UTXOs, any transparent outputs that you know about have a known height. And in the case of the ephemeral output between the first and second transactions in ZIP 320, it doesn't have a known height because we're submitting 2 transactions at the same time. So that's required a little bit of database changes. So we're just finishing that up. There's actually some complicated design issues with what the schema should actually be, but I think we've got those mostly sorted now. And I'm thinking that will probably be done early next week. We were intending to get an SDK release out this week, but it's not going to happen. It's sort of turned out to be too complicated.
Any questions for the ECC team? With Artie integrated on the client side, next step will be to add it to enable a service on the node side, and then some kind of mechanism for Tor-enabled node discovery so that wallets can submit new transactions directly to nodes over Tor.
Yeah, that's going to be a fair way off at the moment, at least, because at least if we're basing it on RT, they're still working on their Onion service implementation. So that's not yet ready for anything other than, it's not ready for anything other than experimental use. But having the client side integrated is definitely like a good starting point for just connecting through exit nodes to there will be a huge improvement, and then we can shift it to Onion services once the Tor team are happy on that side, or we can shift it to any other channel we want there, which would be nice. Similarly, also if we get to the point of having Onion services or Mixnet inbox or something like that, then peer-to-peer broadcasts between nodes will be between wallets will be something that we can use that for as well, because what it essentially provides from that perspective is NAT traversal. So no matter where you are, you have essentially a private VPN-ish type thing that you can use between two wallets.
So something else that's potentially related here. So Dodger, you mentioned direct submission to a node. However, a little birdie told me earlier today that there is a prototype of a Light Wallet D server written in Rust that is supposedly going to be visible soon. So we'll find out more about that. But this I think is for part of Zingo's NIM integration.
That'll be fun.
Excellent.
Yeah,
that's also
yep. And I think the only other thing, I don't know if you mentioned it, Chris, for Zcash D.
Nope, I didn't mention
it. So the other thing related to Zcash D is that so the tail end of sandblasting last year, sort of between when ZIP 317 activated on the network in April and then November, there was a period of time where the sandblasting then restricted itself to the unpaid action limit. So when we deployed ZIP 317, the default logic that in Zcashd for miners for block creation was that it would enforce ZIP 317 except for a configurable number of actions, logical actions per block, with a default of 50 that it would allow to be included in blocks that were unpaid, quote unquote. So that didn't have sufficient fee to be covered. And the intention was to allow that for it to have a space that wallets that hadn't yet upgraded to add ZIP 317 support could still have a chance of getting blocks in. And the sandblasting then started targeting that specific chunk of block space, effectively crowding out any wallets that didn't implement ZIP 317. Obviously, implementing ZIP 317 allowed you to skip past that and ignore it. So, but yeah, that died off in November last year, and then it started up 4 days ago or so. Again, so we hadn't noticed any behavior in between that, but it's come back up. So at least for Zcashd, we've decided that it's now been a year since ZIP 317 was implemented and deployed, and to our knowledge, all of the major wallets that are out and actively being used have ZIP 317 fees in place. And so our plan is to, in the next Zcashd release, set the default unpaid action limit to 0. So anyone who upgrades to Zcashd 5.10 and doesn't change the config, so the config settings will still be there. Miners can still open that up for their own nodes if they wish, but the default limit will go back down to 0. So essentially, by default, Zcashd blocks will not contain any transactions that don't at least pay the ZIP 317 fees.
Yep. And obviously, we're sort of suggesting that this is the desired behavior for the network as a whole. Obviously, CF can make their own decision whether you think that's reasonable. But yeah, that's our suggestion, because it will effectively get rid of this sort of remaining 50 actions per block that is cluttering up block space with spam.
I have a question, actually. How do our RPC tests do with the unpaid action limit set to 0?
We will see that in the PR. Yeah, I thought I'd just submit the PR and let the CI do that for me, rather than bugging down my machine running the tests. I assume that they will fail, and I'll have a few tests to fix up.
Yeah, I mean, in a bunch of them, it should just be setting the fee to null from being explicit, and just letting the default go through. So
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there will be some tests that need to pay ZIP 317 fees when they didn't previously, or we can just override it for those tests, which some of them do already.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I realized I have a question. Do you plan to the unpaid action limits to enforce it when you're mining? Like if you're mining a block, it won't include any of those, or you will filter them on the mempool too? Because part of the problem is, go ahead.
Yeah, the current plan is to change both. So Zcashd has 2 config options, one for mempool acceptance and one for block acceptance, which can be configured separately, but both of them have the same default value of 50. And so our plan is to change the default value to 0. So it will affect both what gets into the mempool and then what miners pull in. But because we're not removing the config options, full nodes and miners can still set those values to whatever they want locally for their own purposes. So, for example, if a miner wants to still enable including in their own blocks transactions that don't pay the requisite fee, they can, on their own, on the node that's generating their blocks, they can set those values to a non-zero thing and then use the direct like submit raw transaction APIs like they've probably been doing already to include their own transactions, like for mining pool payouts or whatever. That will all still work if they wanted to do it that way.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, because that's a good point. From a miner's point of view, they don't need the Coinbase transaction to pay fees because they.
Well, it's not the Coinbase transaction. It would be like if they had another transaction, because if they've shielded into the shielded pool and then they have a payout transaction, they don't need the payout transaction to pay fees because
they're definitely going to include it.
Yeah, they're going to include in their own transaction, and the fee would go straight back to them if their block gets in. So
they might also do things like for their shield Coinbase transactions, if they're shielding their own Coinbase, they might put those in with zero fee.
Yeah, you
obviously those zero fees would not get included by other miners' blocks, but you know they're mining, they're competing for blocks anyway. So
do you remember if they call prioritized transaction on that transaction, will it still get in?
I don't recall the details of how I'll
document that on the PR.
I don't actually recall how prioritized transaction works anymore after the changes because the priority system was replaced. So yes. I don't actually know if those APIs do anything.
They do. I was careful to make sure that they did something vaguely reasonable when I simplified the rest of the priority.
They do. So
I don't either, to be honest. Yeah, they're more likely to get into a block if you prioritize them, but I don't remember the details. I will load that back into my memory.
Oh no, I remember. It was there's two ways of doing priority, and I think one of them no longer works, but the fee-based priority does, where the local node pretends the fee for a transaction is higher than it is. That's the thing. So
yeah, so what you would actually do is get the node to pretend that it's actually paying the ZIP 317 fee, and that would work.
So nodes wouldn't even need to change this unpaid action limit to allow unpaid actions. They could just make their transactions pretend to have the right fees.
Yeah.
So does the submit raw transaction bypass the mempool?
No, submit raw transaction submits into the mempool. But prioritize transaction is like an internal setting that lets you which I believe is persistent, like even if it's not if I recall correctly, you can set it before you do a submission. I think I might be wrong there. It might be that they have to sit on the mempool.
It has to be in the mempool.
It has to be in the mempool. Okay, then
I think.
Then yeah, in that case, what they would need to do is allow unpaid actions in the mempool to get their transaction into the mempool, and then they would call prioritize transaction to bump it up to stay in the mempool.
So if they allow
it might make
unpaid actions, that would mean that they could end up accepting other transactions.
Yeah, I think you're right. We'll have to have a look at that. Thanks for pointing that out, because that might defeat the intent of the change.
Well, also remember that mining pools usually keep their block creating node quite private. At least in my experience, it is not directly accessible to the network. They usually have a proxy node in front. So at least the ones that I've been aware of in the past.
At the very least, we need to document what they should do if they want to get the particular transaction in without changing the global limit.
Yeah.
So they could reject unpaid transactions on the proxy node, but accept them on their block creation node.
Exactly.
And that would solve the problem. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we could find a way to make the fee bumping sort of work as they're submitting the transaction.
Yeah. Or do the thing that some do and just build the block template themselves, using the components that it gives rather than the full example.
We want to make it easy for them to do the right thing, so we'll document that in the release notes.
Yep.
The reason I asked about submit raw transactions is because that would be if submit raw transaction bypassed that filter on the mempool, then that would be an easy way of,
right, but it would also break other usages of that submit more transaction, like, because I think that's what Light Wallet D uses to submit into the mempool. And if Light Wallet D wants to enforce those limits, and it doesn't want that to be something that that Light clients can bypass. So as long, basically, this is why we're not removing the config flags. Miners have the ability to ensure that they can still get their own transactions and if they need to.
I think it's unlikely a miner will be running a Light Wallet D office the same node that they were generating block templates from.
Exactly.
Yes.
Cool. Any other questions for the ECC team? Okay, let's move on to the Zebra team. I'm not sure who's in the hotspot today.
Did we include the wallet update for ECC?
We did mention that, yes. At least for Zashi related wallet stuff, yes. We'll get to that stuff later.
And we have a new member of staff sort of coming on board for the wallet team. But I'll is Andrea here?
I don't see her.
Okay, I'll let her announce that at some point.
Okay. Is it Arya?
Yep, thank you, Dodger. In Zebra, since the last Arborist call, the ECC dependencies have been updated. A docs compilation issue with Rust beta was fixed. There have been some improvements to CI, and support for starting ZebraScan in Zebra has been removed in favor of eventually making it a standalone. There are currently PRs open for using the latest version of Zcash script in ZebraScript, which allows Zebra to use different ECC dependency versions than those in Zcash D and should be helpful for testing that it builds with changes in Libra Zcash PRs. And running the ZebraScan scanner on its own process with blocks from RocksDB and Zebra's RPC server. There's also a new tracking issue for adding an indexer service. Zebra seems to just be missing a way to notify RPC clients of changes to the best chain tip or mempool from C validation interface, and one RPC method for getting a block's nullifiers without the rest of the block from Light Wallet D.
Those last few items are related to Zcash D deprecation. So
ZebraScan has already been split out into another process, or just the prerequisites to do
that? There's a PR open, I believe, for splitting it out altogether.
Okay.
It's been removed from Zebra. There's another one to make it work as its own binary.
Okay, cool.
Any questions for the Zebra team? Okay, moving on. Zcash D deprecation. So yeah, some of that work obviously relates to plans for creating a separate CLI wallet that uses Zebra instead of Zcash D. But I don't know if anybody wants to highlight any other work that's been done in that direction.
Well, as mentioned earlier, we've been working on things in the Libra Zcash crates related to Zashi that are also beneficial for this process. In particular, the work that Chris has been doing to basically add symmetry into the wallet backend logic for transparent logic. There's obviously the Zashi apps and the mobile SDKs that ECC produces are shielded storage first, or shielded storage only rather. So you can receive to transparent, but then you cannot do arbitrary spends from transparent. However, Zcash D wallet does allow arbitrary spends from transparent, and a replacement for it will need to do so as well, because that is one of the primary use cases of it, doing like transparent transactions on exchanges. So the work that Chris has been doing to add essentially a more symmetric representation in the wallet backend of how transparent outputs are handled, which will then still be insulated from the mobile SDKs in terms of what the mobile SDKs will still be shielded storage only, but this is the beginnings of enabling that functionality to be used more generally in a certainly in terms of their effects on Zcash client backend code and the general wallet code within it. The changes there will become important for the main wallet backend. We've also talked about the next steps for actually starting building that wallet backend, the one that will become the wallet service. So there's work. We have two large corpuses of tests related to wallets in the Zcash ecosystem. We have the Zcash client SQLite tests that are directly testing these backends at the moment. And so we have a set of tasks outlined for migrating those to be generic over the wallet backend so that then they can become tests that we apply to the wallet service backend when that is extracted. And then separately, there is the corpus of RPC tests that exist in the Zcashd code base, which we don't currently have any direct plans for pulling those over. But at some point, that corpus of tests will want to be either adapted to be able to test a wallet service or ported into the Rust framework for testing things directly, because it's a great archive of weird stuff that people want to do with the Zcashd wallet, and it pins a bunch of the behaviors of the Zcashd wallet that people currently rely on. So that sort of combining those two into sort of like a unified corpus is a sort of longer term goal for ensuring that the replacement wallet does what we need. Then
I don't necessarily want to replicate all of the bug for bug compatibility.
Oh, not bug for bug behavior, no.
Yeah.
But in terms of functionality that is required, it's a good source of things that we currently are able to do. There's also open tasks that are going to be worked on for enumerating all of the things that the replacement wallet needs to be doing, and things like what the various components of the wallet service need to be passing what kind of data they need to be passing around, such as what the wallet and scanner need to be able to obtain from the indexer, and so on and so forth there. And then I think the other thing related to that's in the last couple of weeks was just mostly fixing bugs related to how the transparent balance within the wallet backend is used and represented. So there's a few bugs that we're fixing actually that fixing those will also be relevant to this. Anything I missed? Nope. Okay.
Okay, any questions on any of those topics? Okay, moving on. Any updates on trailing finality?
No updates.
Any updates on? I don't think we have anybody from who's working on Zcash Sustainability Fund. Just double check. No, we don't have anybody on from Zcash Shielded Assets, so that just leaves Frost. I'm guessing Camaro's in the hot seat today.
Yeah. We're still working on the refresh shares functionality. It's working, but we realized that we need to do some API improvements. We also realized that there was a small issue related to serialization. It's a small detail which is annoying, which is that the Frost specification doesn't allow you to serialize the identity, and this does happen during the refresh shares protocol. It's easy to bypass. You can just remove the identity and re-add it when you resume the protocol, but it's just annoying. We're addressing that. We also are doing a few changes to the Frost core and the Cipher Suite crates because we have to do some API changes related to NoSTD functionality, and one thing in the Rust compiler that we were doing but will break in a future Rust release. So while we will break the API anyway, so we ended up selecting some things to also change. And these are mostly related to how you serialize and deserialize things, like not the functionality itself, just API. So these API changes, they are done, they just need review. And we'll probably make a 2.0.0 RC0 release to gather feedback to see if people are happy with these refactorings. And if you have any suggestion of any improvements that would require breaking the API, now is the time. But yeah, we'll do the release candidate maybe next week. And then after some time, we'll do the 2.0.0 release. But it's just API improvements, no other than the refresh shares functionality that hopefully will also make it to the 2.0.0. And the work on the Frost server, which helps people use Frost by making it easier to communicate. It's kind of paused due to this other things we're working, but I'm going to resume work on it by adding user registration. I think that's it.
Any questions within Frost? I want to say that I think the oh, Alfredo.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I saw in the forums that there are a few proposals for the dev fund that use multi-sig Frost. Do you think Frost is ready for that? Or will it be ready for kind of November if that proposal gets enough tracking?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I just think the tooling it's a bit awkward to use. It's like just command line. We don't have like graphical interfaces, but it works.
The proposals that I saw were for multi-sig, but they weren't particularly dependent on it
Yeah.
being shielded multi-sig.
Yeah.
So it could
Oh,
just
yeah, it can be done with the
PTSH.
scripts. Right.
Yeah.
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 And you could start off, if there was a proposal that wanted a multi-sig approach, it could start off with a transparent multi-sig and then in a later upgrade, replace that address with an equivalent, same entities, but a shielded multi-sig, Frost
Yeah.
multi-sig, if one were.
Oh,
I will make a
Go on.
point that this is just a technical point on that, but I am highly skeptical that it would even be possible to use a transparent multi-sig in practice, because remember, you're doing this for 1,000 plus outputs a day.
Yeah.
That would all need the multi-sig protocol to be executed among all of the participants. So I don't think that that multi-sig approaches that work based upon spending TX outs from either shielded or transparent TX outs from the block issuance. I don't think that either of those are really practical.
I mean, you wouldn't be getting together the participants individually for each block. You would be getting them together, I don't know, once a month or however often it is.
Even doing so, I mean, it takes hours to just with PTPAH outputs to consolidate those into spends. So
okay,
it's not a practical approach.
Yeah.
So
okay, so I will have to correct a post that I made on the forum saying that it was technically possible, and at least make that caveat.
It's technically possible, but
yeah.
Right.
I said technically feasible, I think, which is a little bit different. I'll have to make some caveats to that post.
Yeah, because also the thing there is, even if you use a different approach, like has been sketched out elsewhere, where withdrawals are done via via a separate mechanism from deposits, that can still that still has the option of using either a transparent multi-sig or a shielded multi-sig as the target.
Right, like Skill's proposal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there was a technical issue. We're drifting off of Frost into the general topic of multisig. But I think I said in my reply on the forum that it was possible to do up to 15 of 15 with P2SH multisig. But that was based on a post that I found talking about Bitcoin 0.10, I think, and which is before we forked, but I'm not actually certain that Zcash supports that. Do you know, Strad?
We forked at 0.11.2.
Right, I know when we forked, but it the post that I found wasn't specific about
my vague recollection is it's 15, but we'd have to
version.
confirm. But that's
Yeah,
that's a more detailed point for later.
Sorry, yeah, that's going into the weeds. Okay, I'll figure it out. But Frost is much nicer anyway.
Oh yes, so much nicer.
You're looking very green, Chris. Is that
I just noticed that. I don't know what that's all about.
It's almost like Shrek.
One of the advantages of Frost, I'll let Conrado maybe talk through this graph.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, the way it scales, it's kind of linear on the number of participants, but it's not that bad. And yeah, even for like 1,000, which I don't think in this user case we're talking about, we need 1,000, but it's less than a second, so it's totally feasible.
Okay, that's a Ryzen 9. Yeah, that's not even a particularly beefy machine.
Yeah.
One other thing that I think, well, actually, there's two things. The first thing that I think a lot of people probably don't realize is how useful the repair shares functionality is in Frost. Today, if you have like a 2 of 3 multisig and one person loses their key, then that becomes a 2 of 2 multisig.
Yep.
If you have a 2 of 3 Frost setup and one person loses their key, you can regenerate that key. And it means that the risk profile associated with key compromise or loss is massively different, I think, personally.
Yeah, and in particular the like the way you do that rotation with transparent when you go from 2 of 2 back to 2 of 3 is by regenerating a new P2SH address. So if anyone sends to the old address, any funds sent to that old address are still 2 of 2 to gain. Whereas the refresh, because it preserves the public address, you still, because it's only just changing how the signing key works on the back end, and the long-term signing key is preserved. Yeah, it's great from that perspective in that it's a true repair as opposed to a migration.
So something else that we may start looking into is nested Frost. So let's say you have 3 organizations, and it's 2 of the 3 organizations that need to sign off on the spending of funds. But maybe each of those organizations has 7 people. So you might want to make it 4 of 7. So you have 4 of 7 who take part in the 2 of 3 signing thing, but that's theoretical.
That might actually be directly useful for the dev fund case, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for reducing the attack surface.
That's what inspired the question.
Yeah. Yeah, it reduces the attack surface against sort of developers in a given organization.
Yeah. Yeah, it might also have other useful consequences on the legal side as well.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, and that is actually what sparked the question. Is this possible?
I actually sort of thinking about what Chris said about performance of P2SH multisig and sort of that issue, then I think if we wanted to do a multisig based dev fund, then Frost is the way to go, because it's ready enough that I would be confident recommending to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the question I'm more interested in there is it a UTXO based dev fund, or is it a protocol reserve based dev fund? Because the UTXO based dev fund, I would say that it has served its time, but I don't think that a future dev fund should follow that model.
Actually, yeah, we made some notes about this, and I hadn't had time to publish them, but I can screen share them actually and talk about them here. Let's see. Am I allowed to? I'm not allowed to.
Let's just hold on. Let's wrap up the process.
If we've got enough time, then we can do that.
Yeah. So let's wrap up on Frost. Any other questions relating to Frost? Okay. Any announcements anybody would like to share?
All right. So this isn't necessarily an announcement. This is a so we need to decide on NU6, and we need to decide on NU6 to get specifications for NU6 in a relatively short order. So what I wanted to raise was the possibility of, I think that it is, the way that we do things generally in the Zcash ecosystem is we specify things and then we go and implement them. And we need, at this point, a deadline for specifications. Now, what that deadline is, I believe, should be decided by the zip editors, because they are the ones who are essentially on the hook for delivering the specifications to the community in proposed status, which is this is now implementable. The zip editors have a meeting on Tuesday, and I am not myself a zip editor, but I'm speaking to encourage the zip editors on Tuesday to set a deadline for specifications for any and everything that will go into NU6, and that deadline shouldn't be too far away, because we need time to finalize specifications and start implementation. So,
not to put them on the spot, but I think we have 3 zip editors present. Is that right? Aria, Conrado, and Strad.
Hi.
I have a proposal or a suggestion for the zip editors, which is that I think that there's a zip editors meeting scheduled for Tuesday, July 16th at 1700 Z, and I think that zips that are intended for inclusion in NU6 should be essentially complete and in proposed status, or moved to proposed status in that meeting for anything that's actually going to go into NU6.
For which meeting were you proposing?
July 16th.
July 16th.
Let's see, what's that relative to the ZEC summit?
It's the week after the ZEC summit.
Okay, that works.
I mean, it's basically, you know, I know that ZF is planning on putting forth a dev fund proposal based upon their surveys, and there are obviously other dev fund proposals that have been outlined, but I don't think are yet sort of being written into zips that would be implementable. And so we need, I think, as a community to say, okay, we've got to get these things done. We have to get specifications that are implementable. And we need to set a deadline for that, because otherwise we will not get them in time to implement them.
I mean, that's assuming that we need to do it by November.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
To make that assumption explicit.
Yeah.
With my zip editor hat on, the constraint here is how long it takes to get things implemented, deployed, and then the deployed nodes active, and the nodes that don't support the network upgrade halted by the time we wanted to activate. And so
don't forget
and audits as well. That's correct. So that is quite a lot of things to do. And if the deadline there is November, I forget exactly when in November the halving is, early
22nd or so.
Oh, okay, it's a bit later than that. So mid to late November. That's where the stack will be coming in. So actually there's already some like rough timelines and various things. ECC has a timeline that sort of sketched out things at one point. I think there's some other timelines around there, but we'll just, zip editors should definitely look at what we think is feasible for zips that wish to be able to be active by November. If there are zips that proposals that people have that would be fine to activate after November, then they don't necessarily have to be beholden to the same timeline. But the consequence of that is they would not be active at the halving, which is something that those zips would need to take into account.
I mean, the important thing here is, and this is with my Zcash community member hat on. It seems to me that if a replacement dev fund is desired, which there's a fair bit of polling support for that, I think that a dev fund I think that the block rewards that go to the dev fund going to zero, I think it will be hard to go back the other direction if that happens. That's just personal opinion, but continuity of service is kind of important here.
So I was going to share the notes that we made on sort of deferred dev fund proposals, which are kind of sort of accounting for funds that may be temporarily locked up or and get distributed later. And one of the motivations for this is to solve the problem that Chris was talking about before, about having sort of lots of UTXOs. But the other reason is that if we to basically give more time to decide where these funds are going and what the policies are to disperse them.
Let's just put a pin in that for a moment.
So this is Skylar's proposal you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
It's
a generalization of Skylar's proposal. But we looked at the sort of overall design space there.
But putting a pin in that for a moment, is there anything else regarding deadlines and things that anyone else wants to talk about?
Let's hear from Alfredo as he was polite enough to put his hand up.
I have a question. So how do you imagine the process will be? You put a SIP for each proposal, or you reach consensus before and go with one SIP to the SIP editors?
I don't have a strong opinion on that myself. I think that, you know, I'm always in favor of more specifications that are clearly laying out exactly what will happen. So I think that, you know, in terms of implementation timeline, I would certainly like one zip to implement.
Sure.
Well, the zip editors will have a role in advising on whether a proposed zip is practical and implementable, and whether it, you know, like so like
yeah, that's a good point.
At one end of the spectrum, we have some proposals that assume a continuation of the current dev fund model of slices, you know, 20% or a similar percentage or X% split up into different slices going to specific addresses or multiple addresses. And then at the moment, I would the more complex possibility seems to be what I keep referring to as Skylar's proposal, which is a lockbox, so where funds get locked up. So there's still a percentage, but they don't get distributed to any specific addresses. And I think that's what you're referring to, Dara.
Yeah. So
the other,
I'll let you finish.
Thank you. The other complexity that we discussed last time around was the GGUI proposal, which had a declining schedule, with the remainder going into an unissued reserve or a sustainability fund. There doesn't seem to be significant support for that approach based on the recent poll that we conducted.
That was my impression.
Yeah. And it's also one of the most complex that I've seen, even with the modifications that I directed them towards on the forum to make it doable within the current model. It still ends up being pretty complex. And if you squint at it, it's effectively equivalent to putting all of the funds into a directly into a like a holding pool and then issuing on a declining curve out of that. So you could also squint at it and like handle the curve piece in a different way outside consensus potentially, or in a mechanism apart from that, or implement it later. There's other ways that the complexity can be potentially moved around, but it is one of the more complex ones.
Yeah, it depends what you would count as being the issuance curve in that case.
So I think to kind of introduce Dara now, I think
yes.
the as things stand right now, the only complex proposal that I'm aware of is this lockbox proposal, where the funds get locked up in some manner. So they're not given to the miners. The percentage is locked up into a lockbox to allow the community time to decide what they want to do with it long term.
So one of the observations that we made is that the first zip of the ZSF, the one that just accounts for what the funds in the ZSF are, and allows you to voluntarily deposit to it. That is using essentially the same mechanism as the skills lockbox, and there's a difference in interpretation of how you consider those funds and what they're for, but as in terms of technical mechanism, it's very similar. Let's see, can I screen share now? Yes.
Oh, you should be able to.
Okay.
I think in terms of implementation complexity, the big question in design space to me is, you know, UTXO per block model versus pool of funds that is or multiple pools of funds model, but that are represented more directly in the protocol.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
And each of them, there are some approaches that are simpler with UTXOs and some approaches that are more complex with UTXOs. There are some approaches that are simpler with a, you know, in protocol reserve. There are other approaches that are, you know, more complex with an in protocol reserve. But that's an important sort of design space decision to be made.
Yeah.
Because what I guess what I'm saying is, whatever decision you make there will necessarily constrain your solution space in terms of other parts of the proposal. So for example, you know, there might be limitations on, you know, multi-sigs, you know, or like practical limitations for executing the signature process if you go with a UTXO model.
Yes. Yeah, so there are three categories of arguments for the lockbox style model: efficiency, security, and sort of deferring decisions that we sort of don't know how to make at the for the time being. And so efficiency, so Chris basically went through that before, but we have some figures here for the actual number of outputs that are needed. And so basically it's a lot.
It's a lot of outputs. The actual like fee cost is not too great, but it's really just the cost of the number of outputs and the amount of computational power and block time to be able to coalesce.
Yeah. So to me, one of the most important issue is security. So if you literally have these multi-sig keys, then they have the potential to be compromised. Whereas if you sort of, even during the time when you're not paying out the recipients, they can potentially be compromised. Whereas if you just account for the
scroll down, Deborah.
Yeah. Oh yes, here we go. If you just account for the sort of the amount of funds in each pot, then there are no keys associated with it yet, and so
yeah, I think like to my mind,
that vulnerability.
To my mind, the lockbox idea is not to issue or to send the funds to a multi-sig address. It's to lock them up in a way that they can only be then accessed through a network upgrade, which would require
exactly.
So I would suggest discounting that multi-sig approach for the lockbox.
Well, it's not necessarily that you wouldn't have multi-sig on the lockbox. It's that's one design space for how to get funds out of the lockbox.
Yes.
There are more and so further down we sort of sketch out what the design space can look like.
I think
because Skylar's proposal was essentially one design point in the design space, and so yeah, we've got some notes here about like a few different ways that this could actually work, and there's a diagram down below that makes it a little bit easier to
this is probably what we need to discuss. So
one thing I want to caution against is allowing technical possibilities to drive the intent. I think the intent should be what drives the technical solution. And if there are constraints on the technical solution, including practical constraints like the number of UTXOs,
I mean,
just as an example, then that's just something you have to deal with. But I think the intent should be elucidated first. And certainly my understanding, I could be wrong, and I'm sure Skylar, if I am wrong, Skylar will correct me. But my understanding of Skylar's intent is that the funds are locked up in a way that they can only be accessed through a network upgrade.
Sure, but that's not what we're showing here. Skylar's proposal is one, as I said, Skylar's proposal is one specific data point. And we're not saying anything about like against Skylar's option. The point was that that there are several alternatives in addition to the specific data point that Skylar made.
Hold on, Strad and Dodger. I really need to make a point here. Dodger, I believe that what Skylar had said was that the distribution mechanism would be produced in a future network upgrade, but he didn't specify what that distribution mechanism would be. So a future network upgrade would add the ability to distribute that, but whether that's add the ability for to add a number of multi-sig keys to the protocol, or add some other chain weighted voting, or who knows what as the distribution mechanism. I think that decision is the one that he was suggesting be deferred.
Yes.
And another possibility.
So to look at the diagram and show what it actually shows rather than what you were saying, Skylar's point on this document is essentially the bottom right in this table.
Yeah.
Which is defer the decision on how to do the allocation and stick everything into a single bucket, which is the bottom right in this graph. But the principle of moving away from per output, which is the left-hand column, to more bucket-based ones, even if we don't defer it, is still useful. And if we do defer it, we still have to decide how to allocate it later, which essentially moves us up into the top two rows or to some other approach that we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah.
So the two important ones that I want to, or the three important ones I want to note here is that the current funding stream approach is essentially the top two on the left there, sort of. There's not quite a direct analogy, but it's essentially those two, because they sort of hybridize together in the way that, because of the way that outputs are essentially serving the dual purpose of storing the dev fund and enabling it to be spent. And then the two other points are that, we can't implement defer to future network upgrade if we send to individual outputs, because the moment you send to an individual output, it's immediately spendable. So the bottom left is not implementable. And then the other one we noted is that the top right is likely too complex to be implementable for some reasons that we outlined elsewhere in this document. But essentially what it comes down to is having a single reserve where at any time an individual can withdraw, but that withdrawal is defined by predetermined, like, one address gets a certain ratio, another address gets a certain another ratio. That would then mean that the consensus rules would need to be keeping track of not only a single reserve, but also how much of that reserve belongs to each address and how much of that percentage of belonging to each address had been withdrawn by that particular address. And it becomes a somewhat fractal. It
essentially becomes the per recipient reserve at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So it would make more sense in that sense to do a per recipient reserve, which is essentially, think of it as you predefine how much each individual recipient is going to get, and put them into those buckets ahead of time. But then how they withdraw from that is what you can decide.
It's actually either this box or this box.
Or in defer to future network upgrade, if we wanted to constrain how it was done to some future fancier way, you could still choose to pre-allocate in the consensus rules who gets what. There's that as an option as well. But the data point of the existing addresses or multi-sig, whatever, hard-coded into the consensus rules, merging with a single reserve is likely to just be intractable.
Yeah, and overall, what I want to say is that this document isn't trying to recommend a single approach. What it's doing is exploring the design space and saying what is feasible and what isn't.
Yeah. So it would be great for people who are advocating for particular proposals. Like we should, this URL can be added, I presume, Dara Emma, somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, I can just...
not that URL. There's a view link that you can get under share.
This is the shareable link because this is write only me.
I suggest posting that to the forum.
It's the thing you've clicked copy there on that link. That's the one you want to share. At the top right.
Sorry, is that one? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one you want to share.
Yeah.
And it would be great for people to have a look through this and just use that as an extra piece to inform the proposals and the zips that they want to write, if they want to explore this space.
Yeah. So I will post this to the forum on that DevFund thread after this meeting. So with the context that I've just explained.
Yeah.
And obviously, if people disagree with like our thoughts on this, then absolutely comment on it. But this is just where our thoughts on the essentially how practical both the Skylar's approach is, but also how practical other points in similar areas could be, and things to consider about doing.
But also the benefits of having some form of reserve versus protocol reserve versus UTXO based, because I think we all know, or those of us who've had any hands-on experience with it, know just how much of a huge and massive pain in the ass the UTXO based DevFund has been.
Oh yeah.
Imagine getting thousands of envelopes every day with pennies. Yeah.
Just walk up to your bank and go, "Hi, I have 3 tons of copper I wish to exchange for a note."
They'll say, "Go to the scrap metal merchant." You'll probably get more there. Also, it's no longer copper, is it? Oh, yeah.
No.
But anyway,
I apologize as a protocol designer to everyone who had to deal with that.
There was a complexity budget in the early design of Zcash, and it was already maxed out. So
it was more than maxed out, to be honest. We were kind of lucky.
I mean, continuing with the current model is easy because we already have the infrastructure to handle it. Moving to a protocol reserve-based model would be significantly better. Whether you're continuing with funding streams going to multiple recipients, or whether you're going with the lockbox approach, I don't think anybody would disagree that getting rid of the UTXO based streams would be great, would be objectively good. But again, is it within timeframes, and is it
probably
in the interest of objectivity, I should also point out that it might be reasonable for someone to object to deferring this to a future NU, because it's essentially creating an expectation that something will be done with these funds, and so it's not neutral in the sense that it's different to saying that the funds are allocated to miners.
That's true, but
eventually they do end up going to miners.
But it's a conscious choice to not send the funds to the miners. So the options, in a hypothetical high level, the options are allow all the funds to go to the miners. I would just do nothing and let that fund expire.
Mhm.
Do something that sends funds to recipients, whether that's a funding stream style thing or something like this. But then you have to decide the recipients, and you have to decide, you have to decide all those things, which we will have proposals for. Or you say, well, none of this is ideal. This is not a step forward. This is just kind of perpetuating the current system. And surely we can do better, but we don't have enough time. So let's just put the funds aside, put them into a vault where they can only be unlocked in the event of the community reaching consensus. So I think it's okay, using that objective perspective. The community will have a choice to send all the funds to the miners, or to say, no, we'd actually like to set these funds aside in the expectation, and in full, open expectation and knowledge that there's an expectation that they will be somehow allocated for some purpose at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But without having necessarily to decide that now.
And it's also possible to put some constraints on sort of to partially bind what those funds can be used for without specifying all of the details.
I would argue no, you can't.
I agree with Dr. here.
Because
I think because unless it's ratified in the protocol, then you can't really say anything about what a future network upgrade will do, right? So
yeah, you can only do it on an advisory basis, but I mean that's what process zips already do. So zip 1014, for example, specifies things that you can't enforce in the protocol, and that could be changed by a future upgrade, but doing so would be very controversial.
Or by an amendment to zip 1014, which has happened.
Yes.
Yeah. Just briefly with my Zcash D maintainer hat on, just briefly looking at this graph and just to look at like what I think ease of implementation is. Obviously, top left is easiest because it's just change the set of addresses we have and we're done. And then I think the next simplest is probably single reserve defer to future NU, because that's essentially a combination of tracking we're already doing for per pool output at fund node level and what the ZSF closure tracking proposes. So it's just another thing that the nodes track. And then after that, probably the next simplest would be per recipient reserve withdraw to specific address. Because that means we don't have to worry about how the authorized spend to any address is handled in consensus. We're just using payment protocols that are already in there. So I think the middle,
then this one,
and then that one. Well, you could almost say that, yeah,
those are almost.
Well, you could say that the bottom right and bottom middle are roughly as much complexity, although the bottom right is definitely simpler. But I think the middle row is likely the most complex, and therefore we'd need a pretty strong specification in that regard, very clear specification in terms of implementability for that to be something that is.
Yeah, because the current protocol already has a mechanism for authorizing spends based on the address. So this is saying we have some other authorization method.
But if you squint at it, that middle column is analogous to ZSA issuance.
Middle column or middle row?
The middle row, sorry. The middle row is analogous to the way that a new issuance mechanism is being defined for ZSAs, which is arbitrary, outside the current protocol thing, key material that can authorize issuance rather than spend, but issuance from some pool of assets, in the case of ZSAs, unissued, in the case of this, issued to a specified recipient address.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is being worked on with the timeline of NU7. So that's another thing to sort of take into account for zip design.
But certainly, as far as I'm aware, the only two the only two proposals that I have seen, and like I said, maybe there's stuff that I just haven't seen. I don't keep up with all the forums. Are let the dev. Well, sorry, 3 proposals. Let the dev fund expire. Top left and bottom right. Let's go through some hands. Dara, do you still have something you want to say?
I've done mine.
No, I can talk about anything else on the forum when I post this.
Alfredo?
Yeah, so I was wondering something you said, Dosher, which is when, well, do nothing for the debt fund to expire. In the case of Zebra, if I remember correctly, we need to make change for that to happen, because right now I think what will happen in the halving if we do nothing is that the same addresses will still receive block rewards, but half of them. So
wow, that's not
no,
good.
that's not correct.
That's not good. Well, no, hang on a second.
Yes, that's not good. I think it's an error in outside. We need to. I'm not sure what the zip says, but we don't have a.
The zip says that the funding streams end.
Yeah, it's not correct for the zip, but it might be what's been implemented. I'd be really surprised if that's the case. Yeah,
I don't think we have any limit for that, and we don't have the code. I mean.
Okay, Alfredo, can you open an issue for that right now?
Yeah.
To investigate that?
Because that would be a consensus divergence between ZebraD and Zcash D.
Yes.
Zcash D is still the majority on the network at the moment, I believe, but that is definitely something that
I'm going to go and look at the Zebra source code right now.
And I'm really surprised that wouldn't get thrown up by the audits. If that was the case.
I'm not totally sure. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
I'm not in that code since
it's always good to check.
Yeah, let's shelve that then until we know for sure, because that feels like a massive rabbit hole that we could spend 3 hours going on about.
Right.
Yeah. Let's check that. Please open an issue that can only be closed when that is confirmed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Where should I look for that in the source code? It's in Zebra consensus transaction.
Let's not
like I said, let's not go down the rabbit hole right now.
There is a subcd file you can check out.
I know consensus protocols are really enthralling.
Let's find out for certain, and if it is genuinely the case, we will fix that. We'll fix it now before we make any future changes.
XKCD comic nerd sniping here. Dara is fully disabled in front of the truck.
Yeah.
I've got the code already.
Any other questions? Or any other points relating to this? I think we're
close to time, yeah.
Close to time, yes. We got 10 minutes left. Yeah, and I want to say a couple of things, harking back to stuff that was said earlier, Chris. I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, if time constraints mean that what the community chooses to do cannot be implemented in time for the halvening, then obviously the debt fund will expire. Might as well get all the rewards. But I don't think it's more difficult than to implement something else. It's really about what the community wants to do. I'm sure people will complain. We're always going to have people who complain, but it's about the consensus.
I found it, and it's fine. Yeah, you implemented it correctly.
Phew.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you for that.
I will post the URL here.
And
there we go.
there's something else I want to say. Oh yeah, I think it's really important to have clear separation and air gap between political considerations and technical considerations. Because what we don't want ever to have is a situation where there is even a suspicion that a political perspective or stance or viewpoint or an organization's stance on something like this is causing or influencing technical decisions.
Yeah,
If something,
this is why I sort of try to make it very clear sort of what kind of point I'm making in any particular case, and also why I stood down as zip editor, because there was a clear conflict of interest.
well, I actually don't.
Manager.
For the record, I don't think that there's a conflict. You know, I think, well, there may be a conflict, but it's perfectly manageable.
There wasn't a conflict with me being an engineer and also zip editor, but I think there was with me being ECC's engineering manager and also zip editor. It was too much power.
And in any case, I'm happy for Dara Emma to decide
Also,
that from
yeah.
her perspective.
Also, I was getting overworked, so I needed to share some load.
That is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, like certainly, you know, for the record, my approach with this is I have my own personal opinions. The Zcash Foundation has a stance, and then there's what's technically feasible. And you know, as we previously made clear, we will implement within practical constraints whatever the community decides. We won't seek to use our position to constrain or prevent anything that the community decides, as long as it is implementable. Obviously, if they ask for something that's impossible to implement within a certain time frame, then that's or if it's something that the zip editors go, no, this is a bad idea for these security or efficiency or whatever reasons.
Yeah. Durham, do you still have your hand up?
Oh, probably just by accident.
Okay. Something that would be good to know from those who are making proposals around this or other zips is what they feel they need in terms of being able to get to the point of having a fully fleshed out zip. Like it might if for example, you know, we'll obviously as zip editors we'll figure out what we think is a reasonable deadline next week. If, you know, when we discuss that, but if we were, for example, looking at the proposal Chris made of mid-July, you know, which is essentially just over a month from now, what kind of support do we have the time to provide, but also do people writing zips need in terms of being able to craft those zips appropriately to meet the necessary specification requirements to become to reach a proposed state. Like maybe something near the end of you know, in a couple of weeks' time, for instance, maybe having like a meetup in Discord or something from people who want to like ask questions or whatever, or get some like office hour kind of things. Maybe that would be useful. Yeah, if you are wanting to do something like that and you have thoughts on what would be helpful for you as a person trying to write one of these zips, what would be helpful for you for doing that, then either mention it on the forum or mention it in the Zcash R&D Discord in the Zips channel. And we can try and see if we can figure something out to in terms of just like making it a bit easier to get through that point. Because obviously for more complex and technical zips, we do that kind of work and like give that guidance during the zip review process. But for these kinds of zips, and particularly on the timelines that are needed to get those ones through, that's going to be potentially impractical. So something more collective or more direct might end up being a bit easier. But yeah.
I think also I would say that anybody who is intending or proposing or planning to put forward a zip should be attending the Arborist calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or reading the notes on them. Like
yeah, so
we're very lucky to have people who summarize and make the notes available. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say that for the 1000 series zips, so the alternatives that the one was chosen was zip 1014. The zip editors provided quite a lot of help to the proposers, because it was appropriate that the proposers didn't need to have the same technical knowledge on how to write a zip as you would for a sort of protocol feature.
Yeah. But as noted in sort of the graph we looked at before, certain kinds of zips don't really necessarily require much protocol things because they leverage existing protocol properties, while others that people might be wanting to write may require more technical chops on the part of the zip author, because while we as zip editors can provide guidance on what is doable and how to structure the zip to be clear and whatnot, we can't really provide a whole heap of like doing the protocol design for you.
On that topic, though, Dara, Emma, and I are not zip editors. However, I certainly would be happy to provide pre-zip editor feedback, with respect to proposals from a technical and specification perspective, because anyone can do that. Anyone can pair with someone who is trying to propose something and say, okay, well, here are the things that you need to, here are the conditions that you need to satisfy, and here are the things you need to think about.
Cool.
Not to volunteer either, Emma.
I have limited time, but for the right proposal, I could be interested in helping. Yes.
We are at time, so any final comments or questions or points that anybody wants to raise, please raise your hand. Going once, going twice. Our next Arborist call will be in 2 weeks in the earlier time slot. So thank you for attending today, and I look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you for moderating.
Ciao for now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See ya.
Thank you.
See you.